So when Sri Ramana was about 18 years old, he'd left home a few years before. His mother came looking for him in Tiruvannamalai. She had heard that there was someone who fit his description, who was living in a cave in Tiruvannamalai. And so she came there to try to prevail on him to come home. She wanted him to come home, return to the family life. And he was in silence still at that time, and so he wrote to her. He said, as she sat in front of him, he wrote down on a scrap of paper, "The ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their prarabdha karma. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen, try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen. Do what you may to prevent it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain silent." And of course, most of you know that then this became his reply, his answer to many questions throughout his life, when people were concerned about this, that, or the other thing. And they would present him with different questions and present essentially the problems in their lives or what was concerning them at that moment. And often his reply would be to just keep quiet, to leave things alone and to see how they unfolded. And he demonstrated this also in his own life. During his lifetime in southern India, the plague was quite common. And the way that they would deal with the plague in South India was that the towns and cities would empty out. So people would either train up to the north, to the Himalayas, or they would go out to the countryside to their families' homes or return to their families' farms and things like that. And they would just empty out the cities and wait a period of time for things to pass. But Sri Ramana would just sit. Everyone would leave, and he would have the whole town to himself. And these were times when he sometimes would take up his habit again of walking on the mountain and visiting temples that were important to him. And he would use this time when people were concerned, upset, panicking, to just keep quiet, to remain still, to return to the simple life he'd had before. Dozens, then hundreds, and eventually thousands of people would come to see him. So I thought today I'd share this with you for obvious reasons, since the world is sort of in a panic right now. Because it's also in line with something I say to you quite frequently. And that is to ask you the question, when you're undergoing some sort of trial with your life or in your mind or in your emotions or something, I try to remind you from time to time to ask yourself, how can I use this? This is not only to give you something to do and distract the mind, which this works very well for. It takes the focus off whatever it is you're worrying about and puts it on some sort of the solution, because as you know, the mind likes solutions, even when there really aren't any and it doesn't have any control over them anyway. nonetheless, it likes to chew on something. So if we ask ourselves this question, how can I use this? Then it becomes more, we could say, in alignment with our intention to wake up rather than to support the conditioning, which is what tends to take over when people panic. And when we lose control in some way of the thoughts that are, or the emotions that are raging through us at a particular moment. How can I use this? Some of you may have already noticed that around town it's very much quieter now. There's not any traffic. People are not out. The streets are calm and still. So for those of us that are interested in spiritual life, in the life of the Sadak, what's happening now becomes an opportunity. And there are parts of us, of course, that might look around and see in our families and so on. We might feel the fear that rises as people are talking more and more about this virus and what the impacts are and how travel is being reduced and how the country's not ready medically, and all of this is happening, and all of this is we're aware of all of this. It's being broadcast everywhere. And so we can use this opportunity for in a couple of different ways. One, we can begin to notice the ways in which our mind responds to fear. This is a very, very important and useful thing to know about ourselves. How does this particular mind, how does this particular set of emotions, conditioned as they are, spin off into fear, into dread, into worry, into concern? The reason this becomes an opportunity for us is because the more we're able to identify the moments at which and the ways in which our particular body, mind, and our particular conditioning goes off into its fear state, the more we're able to say, is this true? We're able to ask ourselves, is this fear that is rising right now? Is this really true? Is this necessary? And if fear is here, how does it arise? And how can I let go of it? So now, by undertaking this kind of a practice, we're not supporting what's happening in the group consciousness. We're actually using what's happening in the world, which in many ways we can say the world is just going on pause right now, right? This is all that's happening in some ways. Life itself has decided that it's time for a pause. There are many aspects of this pause which are really, really helpful and useful. The busyness of most of the minds on the planet, in a very unnatural way, but nonetheless in a very useful way, is being reduced. People simply can't go places, they can't stay involved, they can't distract with things. So, we have this opportunity to just notice, as practitioners, that the world is becoming quieter. Just the noise levels have gone down enormously in the last 3 days here in town. The town has become very still and very quiet and very peaceful in some ways. Now that doesn't mean that there isn't an attitude around. If you go into a store or you go into a shop, you can feel this attitude of fear. But then you can also notice, how do you respond to this fear? Do you respond by becoming fearful? Do you contribute to this fear? Or is your practice to remain peaceful and calm and not distracted by this fear, but rather to remain as you are, silent, poised, aware, knowing I am aware, even with this, and not becoming distracted by the fear that moves through the society at times like this. If you're able to do this, then you become helpful, useful. Whether you stay at home all the time and just radiate your peace, your love, your compassion toward the world, which is suffering and seem to be heightened right now. But you also don't contribute to the fear base by worrying, being upset, being concerned at this time. Because, as you know, what will be. And everything that is God. And everything that is here for us to use to awaken to the fact that you are being, consciousness, and bliss. So during these times, just keep coming back to this recognition that this is useful for you. You have the opportunity, many of us now are going to have the opportunity to stay home. Some of us are going to feel like this is being imposed on us from the outside, and this is where the difficulty is going to arise for people. But we are sadhaks. So for us, there is the opportunity to say, oh, I get to stay home. I get to inquire. I get to remain quiet. I'm not forced out into the world today. Today I can stay home. Tomorrow I can stay home. Of course, some of us can't. There will be times when we have to go out. But if we're coming from this place, that this is an opportunity for us to remain peaceful, calm, aware, and sometimes aware of what our own fears are and where they're coming from and how they motivate us and how they drive us, and then actively working to let go, to return to peace, calm. Then we contribute in a beneficial way to the world, even though we're not interacting in it, even though we're just staying at home and being peaceful and calm. It's said by the sages that one awake being benefits the whole entire world. So be that awake being during this time of apparent upset and crisis. There is nothing you really need to do but understand something about who you are, notice your motivations, and then act according to what you know are the attributes of an awakened being. Live in the world as it slows down, as it pauses, and as it calms, even for this frightening reason for other people. Live in the world in peace, understanding, compassion. Let yourself be here, now, in every moment. As things slow down, we have the opportunity to really sink into here now, to let go of past, to let go of future, and to be here, wherever here is. Radiating love, compassion, understanding, being, consciousness, and bliss into the world, even as the world struggles. tendency for all of us during these times, especially if we listen to the news and watch TV and live online in any way, the tendency is for us to be bombarded with the statistics and the difficulties of what is happening in the world. And of course, to be informed to a certain degree is helpful, because this is what makes it possible for us to know that now is not a good time to fly to China, for instance, or to somewhere else where the virus is impacting people. So to stay informed in some ways is not necessarily a bad thing, and to stay informed in a way that says, I am sending my love, compassion, understanding, attention, and awareness to all those beings who are in this place at this time, and who may be suffering mentally, physically, emotionally as a consequence of what is happening. To stay aware in this way, again, is a beneficial thing. So we don't want to necessarily refuse to acknowledge what's happening, but rather to recognize our part in it and ask ourselves, what am I contributing at this moment in time and space? Am I contributing love, compassion, peace, calm, or am I contributing fear, upset, emotionality, these kinds of things? So use this time to come closer to the heart of being, even as we're being asked to stay further away from each other, to help control the spread of the virus. To stay away from each other, to curb our traveling, to be aware of the suffering of others, requires that while we keep our distance from one another, we keep our hearts open to one another and to the world. That we don't isolate into fear, into drama, into misunderstanding. That we keep our hearts open to everyone in the world. That we show within our own being that we possess an abundance of compassion, of love, of kindness. And that we use this opportunity to continue to ask the question, who? And when we notice that fear is rising in the mind and body, we notice that which is aware and let the fear go. This is our opportunity at this moment and under the circumstances and the conditions under which we are all living right now.
directions to go in this topic that all would be very relevant to me. Maybe on another day I can get to the other two. I guess for me, a couple months ago I brought up in the group that the biggest issue that I feel in my life now is fear of isolation and loneliness, and how I would distract myself with busyness to get away from those fears, and was pretty successful at doing it through distraction and busyness.
Not uncommon in the world, huh?
Yes. And so I tried to curb down my busyness after that discussion, and I did to an extent, but I was still was very, very busy, and sometimes to the point of agitation in myself. I was busy doing things that I loved to do, but it was so much of it that it was agitating. And but I kept it up anyway, because that was my habit. And now this is causing all those props.
Absolutely.
The rug is being pulled out from under me.
Yes, and
Completely.
everyone else that's busy in the world. Absolutely.
Yes, and so my fear is not this disease. I feel, at present, as far as I know, it's not happening here in Silver. So, present moment in that way, that doesn't affect me personally here. But
except that everyone else that you are used to using as a distraction in all the other
it
places.
affects them.
Well, though, whether it affects you directly or not, the effect is that people are withdrawing.
Yes, exactly, and that affects me.
And this is they're not only withdrawing out of fear, they're also withdrawing because this is what is being said all over the world. Please stay home.
Right.
Please
Right.
don't go out.
Right.
Right?
Right, yes. So, what I have been noticing is that, and this is new, because I've only been in solitary confinement for just a few days, and it's hard to say how long this is going to go on for. But what I've been noticing is that the fear of isolation and loneliness is much worse than the actual experience of it.
Very good.
And I've been actually kind of noticing that at first, the first day or so, when everybody started withdrawing and Will entered and my, just people were like not going out and stuff, and so my initial reaction was to freeze up and kind of freak out a little bit, like, oh no, it's like all my props are leaving me, and now I'm like here, facing myself. And so for the first 24 hours or so, it was a little bit scary for me. But then after I settled in, it was like, I guess when I was younger, I felt isolated a lot and fearful of being isolated and lonely when I was in my childhood and stuff. But I didn't have any tools to work with that at that time.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that now I have them.
Yes.
And so it's actually been an interesting and even enjoyable experience the last 2 or 3 days to just be sitting
Very
at
good.
home and saying,
Very
wow, I'm really not freaking out at the moment. I can meditate, I can read if I want to. I haven't really read very much because I don't want to distract myself with reading. But I have that option because I stacked up on books and then I haven't opened any of them.
This
But
is
I can
very good,
meditate.
Rosemary.
Yeah, it is.
This is very good, and this is exactly what I was pointing at in my comment about notice the way use this opportunity that's here now to notice the way in which fear manifests in your life, and also the ways in which you can keep letting go.
Yeah.
And keep letting go.
Yeah.
That's exactly the practice I was talking about.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes. So, I mean, this is what's happening in the moment.
Yeah,
I
very
don't know
good.
what's going to happen next week, next month, next year, if this is still going on, but for right now.
Yeah, but if you start with this foundation,
yes.
chances are this foundation is going to strengthen as time goes on.
Yes.
It's not that more things won't come up, and they might even come up more rapidly as the mind starts to get more and more squirrely around day 5, day 6, day 20, day 50.
Yeah.
You know, that may happen.
That remains to be seen.
But here now, if you start to put this foundation in place, then the chances are you'll be in much better condition.
Right.
Come a month from now or 2 months from
Yes.
now. And in fact, you may find what yogis and sages and saints have been saying for forever, which is that being alone is a source of strength. It's not what the mind fears
Feels of things.
loneliness is.
Yes.
That there is a big difference between loneliness and being alone.
Right.
And that this is the realm of this kind of question, is how do I respond to this, and what ways does fear own me, and in what ways can I strengthen my ability to be able to just be still, to remain peaceful and calm in the midst of whatever is happening.
Right.
This is our practice. It's not a practice to separate ourselves and go sit on the top of a mountain somewhere. It's to ask this question, what is aware in this here and now, and how can this be used as a way of understanding more about who I am as being, consciousness and bliss. Very good. Very
Yes.
good. Yeah, start now. Don't wait.
Yes, I have no choice, so that's what I do.
Yeah, but isn't that the benefit?
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It's great.
You know, the things that we're unable to do, we think we're unable to do in terms of our practice, in terms of our ability to do anything in life, suddenly could become crystal clear when a lot of other options are taken away from us.
Yes. Yes, and a week ago, I had a dream, and I got involved in a little bit of a dream group to kind of sort it out. But the dream was that this madman was hitting me with this great big stick. He was yelling at me, and he was hitting me, and he was hitting me on the knees and on the legs. And I was trying to run away from him, and he was just chasing after me and hitting me, hitting me, hitting me. And I woke up going like, wow, that was really an intense dream. I was pretty disturbed. Well, I wasn't disturbed, but I was uncomfortable, is a better word for it. And so I was talking about this dream, and it sort of came up that this was like a Zen master that was like beating me on the knees, which are related to fear, and beating me on the legs, which are related to groundedness. And those are the two things that I needed to work with. And then after I had that dream, about 2 days later, that is when the rug was pulled out. And before that time, I was busy doing my busy thing. And it was such an interesting dream. And so, so I'm kind of inspired by that dream. I think about it a lot, and it's like,
Yes, because another way to look at these kinds of dreams and also to look at what's happening right now is that is a basic tenet of Advaita teaching, and that is that at some moment you must make the decision to stop. You know, to just stand still, to stop running, right? And to just remain present in what is happening.
yes,
And if nothing is happening, to remain present in that, right? So in a way we can say that life itself is saying to the world, stop.
right. And yes, and I've also been thinking that this disease is so scary for people, and it's, as it, I guess as it should be. I think it's a little bit taken to extreme here, but maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this is exactly what needs to happen for me, so that's all that. So, but, I'm thinking, this could actually, cause repercussions in the economy. The airlines aren't running so much, there's not all this business deals going back and forth, there's just a lot of things are stopping, and maybe,
And people are connecting with their own compassion. I mean,
Yes.
it does appear that there's a large dose of fear involved in this, but the consequence of that is that people will stay home. They'll reconnect with their communities, with their families, with themselves, most importantly, if they're able to.
Right, yes. And,
But the opportunity will be there.
yes, and it is there.
And so that's why it's important for us, all of us, to begin to ask ourselves, what is the opportunity here? And how can I use this? Because if we can get the world asking that question, it helps not only to control the fear, it also helps to bring about solutions that are more sustainable over the long haul.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think it's great.
Very good. I think it's great too.
Yeah, that's my progress report.
And each of us is going to face different things that are going to have different levels of meaning for us. For one person, for you, maybe it's this task that you have in some ways been avoiding for a long time. So once all the supports for your habit are pulled out from underneath you, then you have to look at that and you have to see how you're responding to it. And so this becomes a very positive thing. But for another person, there can be difficulty around the fact that we can't travel now and stuff. Those of us who have families at far distance and things like that, it becomes, those become the issues that are most front and center at the moment, or have elderly family that need to be looked after or cared for in some way. And we're not there to do that, so this becomes an issue for people. So there are very real and practical difficulties that arise, but nonetheless, what I'm pointing to is that we ask ourselves, what's the opportunity here for me in this? Just the way it is, without me needing to, without me being upset about it, angry about it, projecting fear around it. What's the opportunity here? And how can I use this? Yeah. Because to cultivate this habit is one that actually ends up being useful for us in many, many areas in our lives and at many, many different times. It's just that this is a heightened moment of recognition that we can ask the question, what's the opportunity here? What do I do here? How do I remain aware, peaceful, calm, supportive of my community, supportive of those around me in this time? This is a firm foundation for practice that we have here, the opportunity for that. The question is whether we will take that up or not. If we're just going to try to continue life as the way we always have, we may struggle and we may suffer. Do we find that we can't accept things the way they are when they change? This isn't a good thing to ask yourself right now. Things are changing on a massive scale all around the society, all around the world. And maybe they'll change back to the way they were a month from now, or 2 months from now, or 6 months from now. But we don't know that. So use this opportunity right now to ask yourself, how is it that I handled these kinds of changes? Right? Even the way that we structure our own thinking and our own thoughts about things. Like you, as an example, I'm not pointing you out, but I'm going to use this as an example because what you said was, and then suddenly the rug was pulled out. Well, if we relate to everything that's happening to us as though the rug is being pulled out, we can see the way we raise our own level of tension and our own level of fear and our own level of apprehension about what does that mean. Again, not saying that that's what you did. I'm just saying that struck me as a good example to use. When we structure our thinking around the rug is being pulled out, this is horrible, oh, I wish this wasn't happening. What we tend to do is clamp down in fear. We don't keep the heart open. We don't remain as loving and as present for whoever we come into contact with next in some way, even though the person doesn't realize that we feel like the rug is being pulled out from underneath us and we're coming from that kind of closed place. They don't know that because we haven't said that to them, but I promise you they feel that. Because one of the things that we're starting to experience now, large and small, is that we are all interconnected and all interdependent. And this is something that, especially now in these times of social unrest in America, political unrest around the world, the fact that we are all interconnected has been lost. And societies are pulling away from one another and retreating into themselves and pulling away from the environment and social problems and so on. And so when something like this happens, it serves to remind us in some way that we can have all the money in the world. We can buy our own private island. We can stay out of airports by owning our own private jet. All the ways in which the rich and powerful try to isolate themselves from the rest of the world. These ways are not working anymore. And in the face of something like this, it makes no difference. Presidents and prime ministers are being infected in the same way that homeless people are. We are all interdependent. And so we can begin to reconsider what the balance of caring and compassion might be. Another way is to use this challenge that's being presented to us and to the world as an opportunity to grow in love and compassion as a society and to grow in awareness and awakeness as individuals. And we can't wait, can we, for other people to do it? We have to do it ourselves. We have to look at ourselves right now and say, how am I using this, this opportunity? And for those of you who are naturally drawn to any form of contemplative practice, then natural quiet, this becomes a rare opportunity when the world slows down and all the imposition of psychic energy and noise from outside begins to slow down and begins to diminish. So take advantage of it. Stay home, relax, eat good food, do yoga, breathe deeply, do qigong, read a book. Don't read books about the plague.
No.
Not helpful. One of the things I've been doing the last couple of days is really trying to stay in touch with people on the phone and so forth, though. It's not to completely isolate but to connect with people in ways that are still possible, and to make people aware of the fact that you care about them and that you're interested in their well-being, and that you're not calling to talk about the drama in the world. You're calling to check on them and to let them know you're thinking of them and that you are still connected to them even though you can't be with them at this moment. So take positive steps toward your own health and eat well, exercise well, sleep plenty, and do these things, and you'll not only strengthen your own immune system, you'll strengthen the immune system of all of your friends and family too by sharing your love and compassion. compassion with them at this time. We're very fortunate, aren't we, here in Silver City? We can still have the opportunity to come together and to be with one another.
It's a wonderful place, actually, to have this happen, because, I think this town is full of a lot of very aware people, and just that container in itself
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in so many ways, those of us that are here in these small places like this are already very blessed to be in a place where we can continue to express community and compassion and so on. Yeah. Doesn't stop Walmart from being out of toilet paper, however. There's still some hoarding and things going on, but
They're out of toilet paper. Oh,
yeah.
Uh-oh. We better panic now.
Yeah, no, this
This
is
is
true
serious.
everywhere now. This is true everywhere. And now now Walmart and other places I've noticed in the last couple of days, they're starting to limit now. I was in there a few days ago, and I was looking around and noticing that people had these carts that were stacked up with toilet paper, and I went to the back because I just happened to need some, and there wasn't any. There wasn't any in the back. I had to go to another store that wasn't experiencing this kind of rush. But yeah, this is the sign of fear and panic.
Yeah,
Exactly.
when the stock market crashed in the 1930s, it didn't crash for any reason other than the fact that people panicked. Because there really was not a crisis. They could have, whatever was happening there, they could have gotten over it, but because people panicked so much that I think they took all their money out of the banks and everything else, and it caused everything to crash. And I'm thinking now, I'm wondering, with so much panic going on, if that could happen again. And if it does, it could be on the one hand, it could be devastating, and on the other hand, it could just cause the earth to stand still for a while and to, I don't know, rebalance itself. I mean, it could have all sorts of repercussions. It's hard to say, but it has occurred to me, like I see, stores are closing down.
Yeah, but this is why it's important for us as practitioners just to understand that our role in this whole thing is to not buy that storyline.
Yeah.
Is to be, to remain as peaceful and as understanding, as open-hearted, as compassionate as we can, even as people who are struggling with ignorance and struggling with fear are experiencing that. Yeah. Because, as we know, what will be, and no amount of fear-mongering or worrying about it is going to change it. But one person to one person, we can calm each other down.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great teaching.
It's a great opportunity.
It's a great opportunity.
Yeah. And what will happen, as it always does. It's a great opportunity to make the decision to practice inquiry, to stay peaceful and stay calm, and to realize that the world will do what the world does. But what business is that of yours? Your business is to love, to remain compassionate, open-hearted, even if it's just with the one person who's in front of you. That's enough. Remain kind during these difficult times. And this is of great benefit to you, but it also benefits everyone else around you. The town, the the state, the country, the world. Don't give up your power for peace, understanding, kindness, because of what's happening or appearing to happen in circumstances around you. This is a firm and central spiritual principle.
Yeah.
Your power lies in knowing you are so much more than this. Whatever this is. And in the recognition that all of this is only the Supreme.
And maybe it's something that really needs to happen. Universe kind of balancing itself out in its own
Well, one
way.
of the things that is happening, and I will say this, this thought has occurred to me too, just along those lines, but one of the things that is clearly happening is that we talk about economic crashes and things like that are coming now as a consequence of all of this. But one of the things that is also happening is there is a carbon use crash happening. Oil is not selling. Planes are not flying.
Yeah.
Coal is not being used. Things are not being shipped.
Yeah.
So there's a carbon crash that's happening right now. And this may be what is necessary for the economies of the world to rebuild themselves on greener in greener terms. We just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
We just don't know.
Mm-hmm. But it's very
So if we maintain this attitude of not knowing, we're also contributing, right, to the sense that something that we don't know about, some new possibility is out there. But we don't see it if we think we know something. So if we can remain in this space and in the place of not knowing, not assuming the worst, just accepting that this is the way it is right now, and the only thing that we know for sure is it will change at some point, then we allow the possibility that it may in fact change for the better as a consequence of what's happening now. That possibility remains out there, and we remain supportive of that, again experiencing and expressing our power in knowing that we are much more than what the circumstances seem to indicate.
So, I have a sort of another question that's sort of on the same line, but a little bit different, but it's kind of all interconnected. But in the Buddhist tradition, there's the teachings of suffering, and that there is suffering, and there's a cause for the suffering, and there's a solution to the suffering. And I've been thinking this week about that, and how I sometimes, or at least the week before all this thing happened, I was noticing how much I was online, and I was doing a lot of reading about what's going on in the world and all this other stuff, and noticing the amount of suffering in the world, and it was really bringing me down. And I was wondering, is it really helpful to be so aware of suffering to the point where it brings you down, and does that feeling down about it contribute to more suffering in the world? Or is it do we need to really be aware and of suffering? And
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of a...
So you have to understand the Buddha's teaching in its essential form so that there isn't a misunderstanding about the nature of that. When the Buddha said there is suffering, he was simply pointing out that suffering was a natural part of the human condition. To be born, You become old, you become sick, you eventually die. That inherent in this was suffering on some level. But the reason he went on and said that there was a cause for suffering and that there was an end for suffering was because he was pointing toward exactly what I was talking about earlier when I said, use this opportunity to look at your own mind, see how you react to fear, see what causes you to go deeper into fear, to spread fear, to become part of the fear mechanism in society. What the Buddha said was, the cause of suffering, outside of birth, old age, sickness, and death, which are the four kind of horsemen of the apocalypse as far as human beings are concerned. So, aside from those things which there is nothing we can do about, right? We are born, during the period of time that we're alive, we age, we get sick, we suffer, we die eventually. So this is just the natural state of affairs. What he said further, though, was it is our responsibility, if we are interested in awakening from the dream that the world is a place of suffering and only suffering, we have to understand how is it that this body-mind suffers in addition to the fact that it's been born. It gets sick, and it gets old, and it will die. This is all going on in the mind. And he was very clear about pointing this out, that the source of suffering, aside from the physical nature of the fact that we have bodies, is all in the mind. And the end of suffering, he pointed to very clearly, was this understanding the way in which we accept the fear, misunderstanding, the ignorance is what he called it, is also what it's called in Vedanta, the ignorance in which the fear, loathing, hatred, self-hatred, all of this is rooted. And then that the liberation from suffering comes with the uprooting of what's going on in the mind. Okay? Mm-hmm. So yes, we do see the suffering in the world and know it's not useful to misunderstand what the purpose of suffering is and fall into depression and contribute further to the suffering of the world.
Yeah, I had a discussion with somebody earlier in the week about this also, and his interpretation of what the Buddha said was, you should know suffering, which for me is different than to say there is suffering. And I think that I feel he said there is suffering, but I think that because I've been involved in that path for so many years, I think there's been some kind of an unconscious thing also in my mind.
So typically,
you should know suffering.
No, in my experience, this comes out of the earlier translations of dukkha, the word dukkha, which is the Pali word which means suffering. Because in the early translations, the way that a lot of us who are long time familiar with the Buddha way, going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years, all of those translations was, the way that it was always translated was, the world is suffering. It wasn't stated as, notice that there is suffering in the world, that you suffer as a consequence of the fact that you become ill, that you become, the body itself goes through this kind of suffering. So a lot of that was just a misinterpretation of what the original Pali indicated, which was not that the world was suffering and suffering alone, but rather that suffering is present in the world, and if you notice, there is suffering present in your experience of the body-mind.
So for myself, what I notice that I do, and I notice what my mind does, is I want to be aware of what's going on in the world because Because part of me feels like that's important, to be aware of what's happening so that I'm not oblivious or insensitive
Yes,
to the world.
but you have to ask yourself, where is the world? You're not asking yourself, where is the world? Where is the world?
My world is here, in here.
Yes.
So, yes, so I do notice that I get anxious and uptight if I'm reading too much of the news, for instance, but I also feel a responsibility to know what's happening out there in the world.
Is it possible for you to be responsible for knowing what's happening out there in the world in order to be flooding the mental space, which is really where the world is, the mental space of your own being, with compassion, with love for the world?
I send metta out to the world.
Yeah, but you're not describing a person who's not overwhelmed by the suffering in the world.
I do get overwhelmed by it sometimes.
Then you're not ready for that. You're not ready to undertake that. If what you're doing is reading, and instead of having a compassionate outpouring out into the world, I would say stop reading. Stop looking at the computer.
Stop looking at the news.
Yes.
It's the news that I look at. I
Then
go
don't.
online and watch the
Yeah,
news.
you don't need those details to sit in your house and do metta practice for the world. You don't need those details. And if those details overwhelm you, you're not ready for the details, so just do metta. When you're ready for the details, you'll be able to look at your computer, look at the newspaper, look on the television, and the only response that will come is compassion, loving kindness. Why? Because you have established yourself in metta. So this is the Buddha's teaching. It's not that you have to suffer for the sake of the world. It's that you understand the way in which you suffer, and then you understand the way in which compassion is cultivated, and the way in which loving kindness moves through you, and then you radiate that to the world. And this benefits the world whether you are on a mountaintop in a cave and you don't know what's going on in the world, or whether you're looking at your computer screen and you're sending metta to this country and that country and this situation and that situation. But if you're not strong enough for that yet, leave that alone. But every day, do your metta practice for the whole world, for yourself, for your neighbor, for your town, for your city, for the country, for the world. Make it so that this is your primary form of practice, and when that metta is so strong that nothing can disturb it, then what will happen is when you read something or you hear something about some difficult situation in the world, your nature will be metta, and it will automatically go to that.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a
Why?
big
The reason why is because your nature is loving kindness. You cannot feel overwhelmed by the difficulties of the world, by the difficulties of ignorance, if your nature is realized, and your nature is realized to be that which is aware as being, consciousness, and bliss. If that is your nature, then all you see when you read the paper or you listen to the news or you look on the computer is ignorance. That's all you see is the manifestation of ignorance in a different form. But because your nature is loving, kind, compassionate, what pours out of you is not concern, it's ever-increasing amounts of loving kindness, of compassion, for ignorance, for misunderstanding, for suffering and pain. This is the person of benefit. No? Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And this is also a way you can understand why all of the Eastern traditions also encourage us at different times, to take time out from the world, right? to withdraw consciously from that sense of ignorance, not because the world is ignorant, but because we're ignorant. And we take time out from that. We take a vacation from our own ignorance, which we see everywhere in the world, in order to spend time focusing on our inherent nature as being, consciousness and bliss, as loving kindness and compassion, until nothing that rises in consciousness is able to disturb that which we know ourselves to be as being, consciousness and bliss. And even within the spiritual traditions, there's been this misunderstanding that what we need to do is isolate and separate from the world. But it's not for the purpose of isolation. It's for the purpose of realizing who we are, so that we can re-engage from the position of true understanding. This is who I am. That my very presence in the world is a blessing to the world. And that as I walk through the world, or don't, as I simply extend my heart into the world, that what the world receives as a consequence is the recognition of its own self. Not that I'm something special, that I am a savior for the world, but rather that the world, by seeing you, sees itself as loving, kind, compassionate, being, consciousness, and bliss. This is our task.
Thank you.
Metta task.
Yeah.
Both in the sense of the greater task and loving kindness, metta task.
Yes, thank you.
So become firm in who you are,
Uh-huh.
and then you can deal with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam urvarukamiva vandhanam mrityormukshiyamamritava swaha bhuva bhu om sat jung hang om. Shanti, 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 Shanti. Namaste, Namaskar, Namaste, Namaskar.